Welcome to the Backpick Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Thomas. Today's guest is Brian Whatley, catching coordinator for the Cleveland Guardians. Brian, a good friend, is an absolute catching nerd. He dives so deep into so many things. He gets into stuff that you would never think about getting into to try to find the best advantages in this game. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. The Backpick Podcast and the Catching Academy are happy to be partnered with All Star Sports, who we think does the best job of taking care of catchers. You can go to their website and use our code CatchingAcademy10 and get 10% off anything site-wide. So I want to start with your story a little bit. Obviously, your background in playing, but I think your story of how you got back into baseball is really cool. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting story. So essentially, obviously played and then got into medical devices and went back to college, got into medical devices at one point, just doing sales, and then actually parlayed that into a distributorship and then opened up my own medical device company and had a partner and kind of just represented the West Coast. And then probably 10 years into it was diagnosed with melanoma. And it was to a point where I had to go get treatment and go to UCSF. And so I did that, just put a lot of things in perspective. So for me, like having the cancer and stuff, put things in perspective and like, what did I want to do? To quit chasing a dollar and just do what I've always felt like I should be doing, which was coaching, specifically just working with catchers. And so I talked to my wife about it and she was super supportive, making sure that it wasn't a midlife crisis. But essentially kind of sold the company back to my business partner and opened up a catching academy here in Lodi, California, and volunteered at San Joaquin Delta Junior College with Reed Peters. And it was a really cool decision to make and essentially kind of led me back into baseball. It was a struggle in the beginning. Obviously, financials are different and stuff, but I was fortunate enough to have a player after about 2 years at junior college, have a player come into my academy that I worked with, Tyler Malone, who was at that time just got drafted from Oregon State, and they were converting him to a catcher. The Padres were. So essentially, I got a chance to meet their catching coordinator at the time. And then when he got promoted, he loved the stuff that I was doing with Tyler and we had some conversations, and then they hired me shortly after for that catching coordinator position. And I was with them for 5 years, and now I'm with the Cleveland Guardians, and it's been just a really good ride so far. Had a lot of really cool mentors along the way to kind of like get me back into doing what I'm doing now. So
talk a little bit about how you kind of got back into coaching, to kind of gain the players' trust. Your resume at the time was, you'd been in device sales and then, coaching for, maybe a couple of years before you jumped in with the Padres. Talk about how you kind of built some trust and figured out kind of some of the newer, when you got back into coaching, catching had changed a lot. Yep. So talk about kind of adapting to all of that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that helped me, there's this line in a movie that it talks about Kurt Warner's story. I can't remember the name of the movie, but anyway, It talks about the head coach pulls him up on top of this roof and he says, hey, the one thing why we love what you're doing out here is you've taken some time away from the game and it's given you perspective. And I thought that really hit home to me when I saw that in the movie, because that's really how I felt about getting back into coaching. I feel that being away gave me a really good perspective, because I think there's a lot of times where coaches, if they just go from coaching baseball and professionally just right into coaching, sometimes they'll carry along like their beliefs and what worked for them, rather than kind of looking at the big picture and seeing like the athlete as a whole and thinking, hey, I don't know anything. Like, let's just try to get this guy better, whatever means it takes. So I think it really gave me perspective on the game, and a position where I had to seek out advice from others, because I really didn't know anything at that point, because the game had changed so much from the catching perspective. And so I got with Jerry Weinstein, who was a mentor of mine. I played for Jerry. He's been an incredible resource for me. He brought me out to CatcherCon. I met some really cool people, Zan Barksdale, Tanner Swanson, Ryan Sanko, Craig Driver, I mean, it just, the list goes on in the catching community. And so it was really cool to be able to pick those guys' brains and hear different philosophies and listen to them talk and hear their philosophies on blocking and receiving and one knee stuff but really go into it with an open mind rather than a closed mind. I think in today's game, we see a lot of that. I think the games evolve and we have to keep an open mind to some perspective. So for me, I just kind of like put everything that I learned from those guys kind of down on a piece of paper and wrote all these notes out and then kind of like looked for a system. Like, what's the best that I feel at that point is the best to really develop catchers. And it came down to kind of taking a little bit from everybody. And so when I looked at it, the one thing that really kind of stood out to me was like the catching position and these new setups and stuff. They can be restrictive, but I also think they can add a lot of value to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get a strike, if you're trying to maybe put yourself in a different blocking position, if you're trying to get lower, if you're trying to change an angle, like I think the one knee system really allows for that more so than traditional. And so I started thinking about like, all right, this is really about situational versus transactional catching. Because what I ended up seeing was I saw a lot of catchers in the traditional setups. It was always a runner on base, traditional setup, slightly angled, preparing for the run or the block. But yet that runner that's at first base might not be that person that's conducive, that's going to run, or maybe he's not going to go on a ball and dirt. Maybe you can have that ball kick away. If he's a big donkey DH, big guy, slow runner, he's not necessarily going to be a threat on the bases. So how can I kind of like tailor our catchers' mindsets to like thinking more situationally of what the scoreboard's telling you, what the runners on base are telling you, who's on deck, who's the next hitter. I always try to have our catchers like 3 hitters ahead in the pitch calling sequence and understanding like where that pitcher is on the mound at the time. Maybe he's got a pitch limit. Maybe he's almost coming up to the end of his innings allowed, especially early on in games. And then who's first out of the bullpen. And then how can I game manage around that, right? By who's on deck and who's in the hole. So getting into really just situational awareness. And in today's game, I see, especially at the college level, especially at the high school level, I see a lot less and less of that. And it's actually not that easy to teach, to be honest with you. It's very difficult. But when the catchers get it, it's a really cool thing to see. So.
Yeah, and I think that's where, we talk to the guys all the time about repping out everything you're doing, right? Like a lot. And I think that's the piece where it's like, I tell them, like, if you want to be able to think outside of yourself and like, I got to be aware of the pitcher's emotions and I got to call the game and I got to know who's on first base and what's on deck and what's coming and the scouting reports and everything. It's like, I got to rep everything out that I feel comfortable doing it. There's too many guys not putting enough work that they're like, all right, fastball down here. If he runs, I got to do this. Make sure watch the block. If you're thinking so internally about what you have to do, you can't think externally about everything else going on. And it just kind of goes hand in hand with that, where we get a lot of these coaches that are like, yeah, guys don't know the game anymore, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, true, but it's the idea that like they're not getting enough work to like get to the point where it's like they're comfortable now sitting in a game thinking about what's going on around them.
Yeah. I think it goes to, I don't know, like I think back, my son's 15 now, but he's gone through club ball and stuff like that. And I think a lot of these kids, I think that the baseball IQ and seeing the game like that is definitely kind of like gone away. You have more, I think you have more coaches nowadays because their jobs are on the line in Division One. Could be maybe a higher end high school program that they're getting paid at a very high level. And they're the ones calling pitches because they want the onus on them. And so catchers are really just become these transactional catchers. Like I said, like they go out there and there's just no visibility of the field and what goes on. And essentially, we don't want them to really internalize that all the time to where it takes time, especially now with like the pitch clock in the minor leagues and stuff that I have to deal with, because I don't want them pausing and kind of looking around and finding out the situations. But over time, kind of like building some scaffolding on your education and brick by brick. And then all of a sudden, maybe you take like one portion of the game that you have them concentrate on. This is what I want you to look for in this game. And then you just continue to build that. So eventually, like they get in these games and the situations just come naturally. Like I'm a big movie buff, so I reference a lot of movies and things just kind of trigger for me. And it's like The Matrix, the very first one, when when Neo's in that hallway and all of a sudden everybody's trying to tell him like, hey man, eventually like you'll see it. And then all of a sudden he's in that hallway at the end and then all of a sudden he sees the matrix like in his thing and he believes, right? Like that's how I look at our catchers. Like that's like eventually you're going to get this situational mindset to where you're just going to be back there and all of a sudden everything's just going to kind of pop into place and you're going to see it and without having to really think because you know your pitcher out there, you know where his misses are because we have these incredible analytics that show that just were like, hey, when he misses his sweeper or his slider or his changeup, whatever it might be, like his miss is 1.5 feet, 2 feet. So for me, training the catchers, like how can you get within your setup to best get to that pitch if he has that miss? And then maybe the next call, like it's a different setup because you know that miss isn't going to be there, so I can be in this setup and still have an effective outcome, you know. So I think getting their mindsets and turning their minds on to be able to do that, I think is super important in today's game. I think that's the next evolution of the game in my perspective, as far as like being a really good game manager. So,
Well, it's the same thing. Like, you know, you're catching a ball just as a hitter's trying to hit that ball, right? And like all this stuff you're saying is like stuff as hitters we've been doing forever. Like, hey, if the sweeper starts in the zone, it's going to leave. If it starts out, it's going to come back. You know, like all these things. And like as catchers, we've kind of had these like just like tunnel vision of like, all right, here's where I'm throwing the pitch. Be ready to react to whatever goes on. But those types of things to think about, you know, that we've just never really done until, you know, the analytics have obviously, you know, enhanced it. But reality is I just feel like catching's been pegged a little differently. And it amazes me because, you know, we're just moving back to, you know, everything I teach, I feel like, you know, at some point I've kind of equated to infield play. Like, you know, like we had a great infield instructor here and it's like, and then I'm sitting there thinking as we're doing it and it like starts working so well with some guys. I'm like, why did we think that this position was so different? You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I think it is treated differently, a lot differently than what we see. I think it's probably the one position because it's evolved more than the others. I think it's really easy to kind of like pick it apart. Um, and I think the evolution of analytics, I think the biggest disconnect that I've seen, and I try not, I see it on social media and stuff, and I try not to jump on there and bash guys and do all that stuff. And I know there's guys out there that do that. And, you know, for me, it's about the player. And for me, you have to look at the player as an individual. And I think with the analytics I think it allows us to look at the player more effectively, to be able to know what's best for that individual. There's so much that goes into it. You know, there's data that's out there that we have that the general public isn't really aware of in a lot of ways. And I think, you know, the best way I could say it is that it's been researched, it's been done. There are some guys out there that kind of pick it apart, but they have to understand, like when we actually look at it and we go back, and I did this in 2020 when I first got hired, we had COVID. So I had our internal guys like, hey, send me every block, send me every missed block, made block, from one knee, traditional, everything over the last 2 years. And I think it was like 3,247 blocks, if I'm not mistaken, but it was a lot. And I had time. And so I just put together this entire thing and I filtered out everything that was kind of like a wild pitch where it was like completely out of zone or way yanked where neither one of the setups are going to actually get to. And then I just categorized everything, the middle and then to the sides. And essentially what I looked at was one knee was superior than traditional. Now, there were some anomalies in there. There were a lot of times where traditional, could they get to the further ones out laterally? Yes, they could. But one thing that really stood out when I looked at the ratio was the majority of blocks that are made in game, roughly around 80%, were right down in between the batter's boxes. And that had a higher percent of misses from what I saw within traditional. And so for me, I'm going to err on the side of one knee where I'm going to be able to make more of the blocks down the middle, which are the higher percentage of the blocks or the pitches in the dirt thrown. That makes sense. So that was just me doing my own little thing for the last 2 years, based off of video research and categorizing everything. And then I think Baseball America came out a couple years later talking about the blocks and talking about like, hey, yeah, like they did it 1 year and it favored not a huge high percentage, but it did favor one knee. And then all of a sudden it came out the following year and it favored one knee again. So I think the biggest thing is I think a lot of guys see traditional blocks and they've always seen it for years and years. And then when something new comes in and something is doesn't look right or it's a miss, it just raises the heightened awareness of it. Like, oh, look, there's a block. But yet people go online and they'll post the missed block from one knee, but then the same day they didn't post the three that were missed out of traditional back in the day. And
Mm-hmm.
now everybody's in, for the most part, a one knee system to some degree. And so we're seeing less and less traditional. So every block that we see that's missed is now out of a one knee. And so it's like, yeah, see, there it is. It's like, okay, well, there's nobody catching from traditional. So it's not like we can show you traditional blocks that are missed. Like, so
And
I
it's not
just
like
think
every time a guy's in traditional, they block it. I mean, that's the part that's like, oh, yeah, he would have
yeah,
blocked it on 2 feet. It's like, no, that's not
no,
true. Like,
right.
you
Yeah.
know, so that's
I just
the
wish there
piece
was a
with
little
that.
bit more fair balance. I think the balance is the biggest thing for me. And then looking at the athlete as a whole, like there's guys that I would put in traditional, and there's guys that I would put in one knee. I'm not fully sold. Like, hey, everybody's on a knee, but I do think there's some issue with like looking at the athlete as a whole, looking at their mobility, what they can and can't do. Um, and are they successful in that setup? And then you make the determination as a coach of what's best for that player.
I love how you talk about the guys, their bodies and their mobility and things like that. Dive into that in terms of like, is there a just like a base assessment when a guy gets in a stance that gives you an idea of what he's like physically going to be capable of doing?
Yeah, I think it's cool. The background that I had, you talked about it earlier. Like I was in medical, but my degree that I got was in kinesiology and sports medicine. So for me, like I look at catchers a little bit differently than maybe somebody that wouldn't have that eyesight as far as movement and biomechanics. And so one of the coolest drills, and I saw it, I can't take credit for it. I can't remember where I saw it. I think it was online. But it's like a four corner drill where the catcher starts out and you have these cones, four cones. It's about 10 yards apart on each one. And they start in the corner. And then I just have them do like in their catching squat, like kind of a lateral movement, just kind of a hop, in their catcher squat to that next cone. And when they get to that, then they duck walk forward and then they do that lateral hop left and then they'll duck walk backwards. And that completes the four corner. And then we'll throw a baseball every now and then, like as they're doing it, just to keep their mind off of what's going on down below. And it allows me to give a really fair assessment of looking at like a functional movement type screening. And so I look for that. And so on the duck walk, like it's really cool when you see it, like a lot of the players for the mobility, their knee, when they're duck walking forward, their knee will actually come out a bit and clear that hip, right? Instead of walking in a complete line. And so when I see those hips kind of clear, that's their movement with the hips every time they come forward. That tells me there's some tightness in the hips. And then when they duck walk backwards, if they feel like they're going to go over backwards because they can't get into that shin angle, that tells me there's some sort of mobility within the shins as well for the ankle mobility. And then just the ones that are lateral, it just a lot of times they'll sit higher with their rear end, and then their heels, if they have to get down, their heels will actually collapse in when they go lateral. So most of their weight will be on their inner foot. And that's also a sign of hip mobility as well. So for me, like those are kind of the telltale signs that I like to use from a functional movement screening, just in a catching type format. Um, Other things we look at specifically, and I've seen this a lot lately on catchers, is the pelvis itself. A lot of catchers, you'll see them when they squat, they can't get their pelvis tilted forward to get kind of this lower back angle. I relate it to like a dog taking a number two in the yard. Like you see their butt kind of like go underneath. Like it's very similar to that. That's the look. The problem with that is it puts a lot of strain on the lower back. And then in the future, you're going to have issues with back strains, potentially stress reactions and some other things that actually come up.
So do you have routines and stuff that do you just go straight to, your guys' trainers to like come up with that? Or do you have some sort of a routine that guys do on a daily basis when they get out to the field?
Yeah, I think, during the academy days, it was really easy. I can kind of create routines myself, pick and choose the guys that I want to talk to about like putting together routines, strength and conditioning guys and stuff. But it was my academy. The position I'm in now, like there's a lot of collaboration that has to take place, and it's actually really cool. The Guardians do an extremely good job of this. Where if I do see something, we have professionals there, so even though I can maybe like look at a routine or whatever, I really respect the guys that we have in their positions. And so I go directly to like strength and conditioning, and then I go to medical, or we might have a meeting together and say, hey, like, what do we want to do with this kid? What's the plan? What's the program that we can kind of put together for him? And let those guys kind of handle it from there. And then I carry out the program, or the catching coaches that we have as well, just kind of like making sure that the follow-up's being done that's there. I think that's sometimes, especially in other program, maybe high school or college, like you'll tell somebody and then it's the onus is on the player. And there is some self-accountability for, in the job that I have as well with these players. But I think there's a lot of follow-up that takes place on a day-to-day basis. And so it really helps. But for the most part, I kind of leave it to the medical and S&C staff to put it together.
So, what are the biggest challenges in guys' bodies in the hip mobility, ankle mobility, anything like that, in terms of figuring out a stance that works now? I mean, you kind of got this thing to a science. We're like, okay, the right hip this, then we're going to go right knee down instead of left knee down, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, again, it's knowing the athletes. One of the things, philosophies that I have is I'm big on self-discovery, big on that. Like, it's really easy for a coach to always tell you like, hey, do this, do that. But there's no buy-in from the player a lot of times. Anytime I tell a player to do this, he's like, okay. And then he does it. And then he's like, well, this is just what the coach told me to do. You hear that a lot in development, right? Well, the coach told me to do that. Well, you want some buy-in from the player. And how that happens is through self-discovery. So like our glove preps or our setups and stuff, I walk them through everything, and I tell them like, know your bodies inside and out. When you do a kick out, and let's say like the flexion in the knee, it could be a 45-degree angle, a 90-degree angle, you're getting to 120s. Like, when you're there, what's the pro, what's the con? So our guys will set up, they'll kick out to like a big leg kick out, right? And then I have them pause and I say, all right, let's think about this for a second. Like, I want you to tell me like what can go wrong in this setup. If you kick, if you try to push off, how far are you going to go? And they're like, not very far. I said, okay, so if he has a sweeper and it's going to be a foot out or a foot and a half, like, is this the best setup for that? No. Okay. So we're going to rule this setup out for this type of pitch, right? So just trying to get them to really understand their bodies and their movements and what works, what doesn't work, where they feel locked up, where they don't. And then we kind of customize setups around there for situations. And for me, that's the biggest thing. And we do have guys like, I was in one of our affiliates the other day, and we were talking about he likes a big leg kick out straight, and he's super athletic, which is really cool to see. But again, is that the best setup for a runner at third, runner at second base in kind of a situational where you have to block a pitch? So we talked about that, and he said, well, I used to block traditional, and I hadn't seen it. And so I'm like, all right, well, what does that look like? And so he tried it in the game that night, and it was unreal. It was super explosive. He got to pitches, whatever. So after the game, we're like, we learned something there, right? We self-discovery. And it wasn't a matter of saying, hey, I want you in a knee, I want you in this. It just worked for him. And so we try to like tailor everything for self-discovery and then what works for them as an athlete and taking everything into consideration.
Well, I love that too, because they do need to be their best coaches. And I think that's the part that, again, with the way that the landscape of youth baseball is, you got guys that just seem like they're just doing what they're told, and they're not really taking the time to understand it and understand why it affects them. And they just go, oh, because, he said so. And, I think one thing that's nice about this generation is I do think this generation asks why more, which I love, right? I do think they're more curious. They're more like, hey, okay, why? Why is that? And I'm like, great, let's dive into this conversation so you really understand this. Because I do feel like in my generation, you just did what you were told. You didn't really think about it. Like, you got to a higher level, you'd start to understand yourself a little better and be like, okay, I kind of know what I need compared to what he's telling me. But like, it never started at a young age. And I'm just loving how these kids are out. They're not pushing back. They're just curious. They just want to know, like, they honestly want to know why they're doing stuff. Do you see that with players you're working with?
A lot. I think more players are now, they are more accountable than ever. I think because the stakes are so high, and the amount that these guys, we just had the draft, the amount that these guys are getting drafted, we're only down to 20 now, 20, some compensation rounds and stuff, but like it's getting smaller and smaller for opportunities. And so I think there has to be some accountability on that side, because players are going to pass you by if you don't. And there's two ways to answer the why, in my opinion. There's one, like, what do you feel like? Is that better or is that not? Like, that's answering the why do this, right? Is that better for you, and what do you feel? And then the other one is just, it is the analytic side. Can you prove it, right? Like, the best thing is that analytics are good. They'll show you a direction of maybe how or why this person should go this direction. It's not always the answer, because I think there is a feel component, which is the other part of the why. But I think those two go hand in hand. And I think when you can combine the two and they kind of can see it kind of play out in real life, I think that creates more buy-in for these players. That's why now, like, when we do certain things, like, it's certain movements, but then there's also, we have tech that's there that shows it. And perfect example, like, we can measure now, like 3 years ago, and we were looking at the blocking, and we were looking like, how do we measure like distances from a one knee? That was the question that I wanted to answer. And so I knew like how to do it anatomy wise, right? You have the length of the leg. And so you have the flexion of the leg, the length of the leg. Anytime, and this is for like pushing and sliding. So anytime like you push and slide, that leg opening up based off of the starting position is going to tell you the distance you can move,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's just basic levers. I didn't know how to do the math. So I actually had a friend of mine, and she's brilliant. She's a great mathematician. And so I told her kind of like, hey, this is what I want to measure. Like, how do I do that? Like, what's the math? So she put it in this Excel sheet. And so it's really cool. So now we can actually take and measure our players, the length of their legs. And then we just enter in the Excel sheet each length of the femur and the tibia. And then we look at like the angle they start at, like 45-degree angle, 90-degree angle, whatever it might be. And then it literally will tell you exactly how far they should be able to move mechanically. So the one thing is, what we look at is, if they're not moving that 1.5 or 2 feet that it says it should, why? Answer the question, why? So then it allows us to kind of look at that. So the analytics tells us stuff, but then we have to do a little discovery of the why behind that as well. And then that creates the buy-in when we show the player, this is the reason why you're not getting to that. And then we make the adjustment, and then they do. And then it's really easy to get that confidence. Like, yeah, this is the setup that I should be in.
That's pretty freaking cool. That's the one thing. It's like, for us in the younger ages, like, we don't have the data, right? And it's like, but things like that are so cool to just, hear, and how deep we're going into. I mean, I think too, you probably learn so much about their bodies in that, test. Cause you're like, dude, like, this says you should be able to go 2 feet. You're going 6 inches. Yep. Like, we gotta figure out what's going on. So I love all that. And I think it's just, I don't know, this is just where baseball's at that I love, is like, we're looking for like, how can I figure that out? What's next? Like, okay, we got this, like, what's going on? And I think that's the part that bugs me about a lot of the naysayers and the whatever, is like, we're just at a point in this game, we're going, okay, that's good. How can we make it better? Okay, that's pretty good. Let's do more. How can we do it better? And so I think that's like the piece that's so annoying. And you've always been so good at kind of finding, other ways to do things. One of those things, which I love you talk about, is just understanding umpires. And I think that's something that's really cool, because, you had shown me you were breaking down a bunch of umpires with the idea of understanding them and how they work. So talk a little bit about that, understanding the umpires and the relationship with them.
Yeah. As a catching coordinator, catching coach, always trying to find ways to find strikes, right? That's the biggest thing. And I understand we're going to have the ABS, but one thing people need to understand is realistically, I think it's going to be the challenge system. I think we saw it in the All-Star game. So I think that's what you're going to have. So I don't think the receiving and the analytics and the framing numbers are going to go away, because once they're out of challenges, they might be out of challenges in the first inning. I've seen that happen. And when that happens, you got 8 innings of just normal baseball at this point. So I don't think it's ever going to go away. And so trying to find areas of what's the next evolution of finding strikes. I'm not saying it's going to be not be in the receiving area. I think there's always things to learn on that. But I think the biggest thing and opportunity a lot of times gets overlooked is the umpire. At the end of the day, they have tendencies. If they didn't have tendencies, then they would all set up in the same exact position, right? They would all teach the same thing. They do have blind spots. They could be right eye dominant. They could be left eye dominant. That's why majority of umpires, I think, are right eye dominant. And when that happens, like that's why the biggest number of misses, there's usually left-handed hitter away, right? Because it's just harder to see that area. So I think when we looked at I categorized every catcher again. I think it was like 2020. It was COVID. A lot of time with COVID to explore some things. And I went through every big league umpire and I categorized every umpire. And what we looked at, it was actually done. My son and I did it. It was really cool. We looked at like where the umpire sits. And so we broke it down into 3 areas, like in the slot, which is like where the black is and the hitter. So in between the black and the hitter, that's the slot. And then over the black. And then does he move with the catcher? A lot of guys and umpires will actually move with the catcher. So then we looked at that. We looked at the height of, okay, do they sit tall? Do they sit middle? Do they sit low? And then we went back and looked at their strike call and the cadence. Like as it's hitting the glove, is he raising his arm? Is there a slight pause? And then we tried to answer the questions of like, what does all this mean? Right. And so we put them in groups and bundles and we just categorized everything and then looked at their heat maps as well. And then we put in this Excel sheet, like all the heat maps of where they were good or where they were bad. And were there any commonalities amongst the setups? And we answered the question. Yeah, there was. And it was really cool to see. And so can we tailor our plan of attack meetings? I'm not going to say this is going to be done at high school or college or even in lower levels of minor leagues because it is a lot, but we have a lot of resources at the big league level. Can we like tailor our plan of attack meetings around that? Right. I'm not saying go away from the pitcher's strengths and what he does best and then the hitter where he does damage and all that stuff and looking at all that. But when things align and then you also know the pitcher or this umpire calls this spot more often than not and those things align, that's probably a favorable pitch we should throw. And so trying to find an advantage on that side, I think was something that I wanted to try to look into and ended up doing that. And I know I gave it to Austin Hedges. He and I talk all the time and about this and he's used it. I don't know if he's still using it now. I have to kind of check in with him, but I know he did use it after 2020 and he carried it around with him in this little black briefcase and he had every number on every umpire and he was actually performed pretty well. So I'm not going to say it worked, but I'm not going to doubt that it didn't either.
So are you having them change anything in terms of their technique based on the umpire, or is it just we're just calling pitches in hot zones, things like that?
Yeah, I think it's technique, it's understanding setups if he's missing in a certain area and these are his tendencies because he's setting up, understanding. I always put our catchers down in position and then put the other catcher behind him as the umpire. I like him to see that advantage. And I'll put him in those umpire positions and then have the catcher, like, have this guy, like, as our catcher's moving around, have the other catcher say, oh, this is more difficult for me. This is more difficult for me. And then usually those things align for what I saw doing that research, right? And so how can we strategize our setups around the umpire setup? Could be perfect example I'll give you is it's a weird phenomenon. I'll put guys back behind me and I'll put the ball. So if you have an umpire that sits, let's say it's a right-handed hitter and he's over my left shoulder and he sits really tall. Okay. And I put a ball probably just below the knee, but he sits tall and then he stays tall. And I put the ball right on the black, right? He's looking down at a certain angle. Well, that ball lines up actually with the black. So you don't see any space underneath, right? It looks like it lines up perfectly. The minute I take that umpire and I actually put him down like this, he actually sees more space underneath the ball and the plate. And it literally will look like that ball's off the plate because he sees the ground underneath the two. It doesn't look like it's lined up with the plate. So for me, like, it's something that probably umpires do, maybe like subconsciously. I don't know. It just kind of happens. But one of the things that I saw was that the tendency was that that pitch got called more a ball when the umpire was sitting lower than he did
Mm.
when he was higher, right? Like, but you can see, so it's like answering the question why. And so I will show like our catchers, like, this is it. Like, and putting themselves in the position of an umpire, they can look at it like, yeah, it looks lined up. And then I just have them sit down a little lower and they're like, yeah, it looks off. I'm like, I haven't moved the ball. It just looks off now. So it's just finding those little bits and pieces. And that's kind of how my brain works. And so every single day, if I'm not roving and I'm here at this desk in my office, I'm like thinking of ways like, how can we gain an advantage? Like, and I'm doing research on umpires or looking at our catchers and setups and stuff. Like, that's the cool part about this job, is that trying to have just one small little impact that can maybe like transition to into a bigger thing, you know?
That's so freaking cool. We talk a lot about kind of the reference of the glove, where it finishes compared to our bodies more than the plate itself. Cause I just kind of feel
Yep.
like everything's kind of, changing in that regard. Do you have points of reference within the body? Hey, we're going to receive it up to our eyes on the guy that's a little taller, or we're going to go make sure we're above the kneecap, anything like that?
The biggest messaging I tell them on glove presentation is really just be, and this is really hard for catchers because they kind of lose focus sometimes and because they're in the moment, but be consistent with your presentation. Like, there's guys that'll just rip through pitches because they think it's a strike or try to sell that it's a strike. Like, yeah, I thought it was a strike, and try to get an umpire. And then there's guys that all of a sudden they're presenting longer because it might have been out. Like, there's both of those. So for me, like, just be consistent no matter what. Like, so even pitches that are in the middle of the zone, present the baseball. Like, present it with a heartbeat, throw it back. Pitches out of the zone that you're trying to get on the buffer zone, like right there, like, just catch the ball, present it. We want to filter. For me, I try to keep everything like on the margins. If it's off the margins, I coming all the way to the middle or coming across, kind of staying away from this horizontal movement, like across the umpire's face. For me, I try to stay away from that with our guys, but just try to be as short, as quick, and compact as we can to like present the ball kind of at the margins into the plate. Um, Try to stay below, obviously, the mask. We don't want to kind of come up above the mask, even if the guy's taller. Just be quick with the movement and be short, compact. Um, Typically, it's a rule like one ball off, one ball on, two balls off, two balls on. Not that you're going to get that high school, maybe, college. I've seen some of those guys, but be consistent with the presentation for sure.
No, and that's always the thing we're talking about, and that's where you get like the haters on social media, where it's like, oh, the ball's a strike, like why would you move that? And it's like, well, like, if we want to move the one on the margins, we got to move the one in the middle so that everything continues
Yeah.
to look the same.
Yeah, and I think like on the receiving stuff, I see a lot of that stuff, and they're like, just stick it, just stick it, just stick it. I understand that principle, um, but at the end of the day,
It's fucking
moving the
hard,
ball
Brian.
works.
Like
Moving the ball,
sticking
it
the
does.
ball,
And that's the thing.
sticking the
Everybody
ball
thinks
is fucking hard. I
sticking the
know.
ball does not happen all the time. Like, if you watch,
That's what
like,
bothers
a
me the
glove
most
in
is
slow
it's like,
motion
oh,
and you stick it, it's pulling you all different directions.
dude.
You have to have some sort of momentum to counteract the momentum that's coming at you. Like, you
And again,
have
we
to.
talk about how this position's been so different. It's like when we start talking about moving the ball, I mean, again, the amount of consistency on pocket awareness, like actually accurate with your pocket, is so much more. And it's like, well, yeah, no shit. Like the first baseman picking a ball is going to like get way back here, create a bunch of space, move through that thing to give himself margin for error to
Right.
actually get it in the glove, right? So every time I start to, even younger kids where I was always like, maybe they shouldn't move it, as much. Like, and we definitely aren't having to move it as much, but it's like the idea of then they start moving it. It's like, holy shit, dude, that kid just ripped 10 pockets in a row. And like, if I'd have told him to just, hey, catch it where it's at, there's no chance he's getting, half of those
Yeah.
in the pocket of the glove.
Yep. And I tell my son is 15 now, and he was like 7, 8, 9. Like, the ball would control him, right? And so for me, the goal was the cue for him was like, hey, don't let the ball control you. You control the ball. Well, naturally, if you're going to control a ball, you're going to actually try to create more force through the catch than the force applying. And if you just stick it, it's going to be more force applying, and it's going to move you and control you, take you out of the zone. Especially with pitches now, with such guys will throw heavy balls, and like not an actual heavy ball, but like the ball feels like a shot put, and it's just
Yep.
weird. Some guys have that spin or something, and all of a sudden it's a curve ball and it's a heavy, and it's going to pull you out of the zone. You have to create momentum through the pitch, and so for me, like I feel that's kind of because that's the thought process. We are moving the ball, but in the end, like it does get more strikes. Like at the end of the day, it really does. I mean, contrary to what a lot of people say, like okay, then prove us wrong because it hasn't
Mm-hmm.
been proven wrong in the past. And I'm not saying, like taking a stand on this big thing because I think there's a lot of variabilities that go into the receiving aspect. But at the same time, like you have to keep strikes. And the pitches are going to take you momentum wise and the angles these guys are creating out of the zone. You have to have force. You're going to have to move the ball back to catch it to where it was initially like made contact with. You're going to have force through it. And that's naturally just going to cause a movement.
And that's the biggest thing right there. You just said is keeping strikes, and that's what I don't think people understand is like we're literally trying to do all these stuff to make sure the
Yeah.
umpire understands it was a strike. Like there's not a lot of times we're trying to fool guys. Do we want to win some pitches on the border and that kind of pumps us up for sure? But the idea is like, dude, it's difficult to just get balls on the black. I mean, it's like people don't realize that with the ABS, it's like it literally can touch that K zone. So we already
Yeah.
have a ball. We already have essentially a ball off the plate and on the plate that are already strikes. You know what I'm saying? And that's the part where it's like, oh, he's moved. It's like, no, like we're literally just trying to make this easier for the umpire. And in today's game, you have the fact that they're graded on every single pitch. Like you don't get to be, Eduardo Perez and just sit out there and Maddox throws you one 6 inches off the plate and you catch it and umpire goes, yep, that's a strike. Because
Right.
those guys don't exist anymore. The umpires, I mean, those guys would be fired in a heartbeat in today's game. And
Look,
it's just
umpires
amazing.
have gotten so good. Umpires have
So
gotten
good.
so good. So good. And people don't give them enough credit, in my opinion. That box, that box drives me nuts on television. I think it's cool to watch, like don't get me wrong. But it drives me nuts from a perspective of guys getting on umpires. If you watch the box, like Judge's box is different than Altuve's, or it's the
Mm-hmm.
same box. So when
Yeah.
Judge gets in there, it's the same box,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like the box is moving, height wise. It's just kind of like it's created for the fan experience, great. But that's why, like, one of the things that I see in our frame reports because we get all the ABS reports, and we have a box too, right? Like, and it's as close as we can get, just like Fox's or ESPN's box. It's as close as they can get, and like I see on the side, it'll tell us like in zone or out of zone, the pitch. It's either a Y or a no, right? And so essentially, like it says a lot of times it'll say, I'll see where the ball is on our box and it's in zone, right? And then over on the side, it was a challenge, right, on AAA and it's out of the zone. Like it's a pitch that's out of the zone by a lot. And so it's like, but our box shows it like in the zone. Like it's just a
Mm-hmm.
reference point, right? For kind of the vicinity. And people need to understand that aspect. Um, because when I look at some of these challenge stuff, they're actually not being overturned as much as I actually thought they would based off of just looking at that box. And umpires are really good. They're really good. Now, lower levels, yeah, but they get better,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so I think
again,
that's the biggest thing.
you know, lower levels is like, I mean, our umpire's an issue because we just can't find people to even want to do it anymore. But it's just at the highest level, it's like, and that's why I always tell people, I'm like, dude, we're getting up to like, these guys are like, as a whole, are like 94, 95% right on strikes. And so, like, we're bitching about ABS. It's like, we're bitching about a 5% problem here, right? Like, this is not a big deal, but it's just the idea of like, oh, it happened in that moment. So, like, we lost because of that. It's like, well, no, that's
Yeah.
not exactly the case. But again, that's why I'm cool with the challenge thing because it's like, hey, maybe the one or
I
two
like the
pitches is
challenge.
maybe that is the 5%. It's just the hey, let's just have one or two or three challenges. Allow us to try to adjust the 5% that these guys are missing. But I'm pumped to hear you say that because that's exactly the case, man. I watch TV,
Yeah.
and even when instant replay came in, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, or whatever, on the bases, I was astonished at how few calls got turned over. I mean, those guys are
Yeah.
so freaking good at what they do.
They're really good. And when somebody's has a really good relationship, a catcher has that with the umpire, and these guys, especially at the lower levels, the ones that are willing to learn, and the relationship is so important. There's guys at the lower levels that just aren't going to talk. They're going to be very stoic, and that's fine. But the ones that really want to learn, that leverage the catchers, have good communications, talking about like, hey, is this a good angle? Is this a good setup? Do you have a good lane? Like, they have to understand, like umpires, and I tell our catchers this all the time, they're trying to get to the big leagues too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just like you are. So if you guys can work together and you can be better and he can be better, like that's a win-win. So you have to present that to them that way. And don't be superficial with the stuff that you talk about with these guys. Like, don't look them up online. Like, oh man, oh yeah, I heard you had a dog or something, like something that you can find. Like, and when they talk to you about something, like remind them at the very, the next time you see them, like, oh hey, how'd your son? You said your son was going on a trip or whatever. Like follow up with the conversations and take notes and stuff. Build that relationship. You might have these guys in the big leagues, and I think it's super important to be able to have that communication and work together. It's not like him versus me. And I think often we put, because of what we see on TV, we put him in that position where it's the catcher versus the umpire, rather than creating this kind of bond and team, like work together. And if we're both really good, that's a win for both of us.
No, for sure. I love it. Now you're with the Guardians, and it's kind of a catcher's dream over there. Talk a little bit about the guys you're working with. I mean, you're with all the catchers. You got Sandy Alomar working with the catchers at the big league
Yeah.
level. You got Albies, the bench coach, Craig Albernaz, and then obviously Stephen Vogt is the manager. So talk a little bit about
Yeah.
kind of coming into that.
Yeah, I have been super fortunate and blessed to have really good mentors. I think I mentioned earlier Jerry Weinstein being the godfather of catching, having him as a mentor, and I really looked up to him a lot and kind of lean on him when I can. Don't talk to him a lot, um, but then now I had AJ Ellis with the Padres, and AJ was probably one of the smartest individuals I've ever been around from a game manager. I don't know how he's not a big league coach manager by far. Probably one of the smartest people I've ever been around, really connects with players, and probably learned a ton from him. That has helped me kind of like along my journey over the last 5 years, now being with the Guardians, being able to be in a position to kind of talk with like you said, Albie and Sandy and Voter, and just watching in spring training those three guys, and just the connection that the players have. That's one of the biggest things that I will tell you. They're super smart, but one of the things they do really well is player first mentality, having grace for the players, um, and really high end open communication and trust. And being able to see that from afar has been really cool to see, and learning that and just understanding like how can I put myself in those types of positions to be able to do that same thing with our minor league guys and watching them on the big league side. And it's just constant professional work ethic. It's just really cool to see. Um, I learned a ton of drills from Sandy. I don't really get geeked out by like players or anything like that. I'm not starstruck by any means, but Sandy Alomar, like growing up as a catcher, like before I made it into the minor leagues, like he was the guy. I used to watch him. I think
Mm-hmm.
when I started throwing from a knee, because I saw him throw from a knee and thought, oh, I can do this. And so I did pull him aside a little bit and tell him that. But he's amazing. And the coolest part about all of those guys and being with the Guardians is zero egos, zero egos. Like those guys, if I came in, they're like, no, go coach him, go coach him. And it's like, well, this is your guy. And they're like, no, go coach him. If you see something, coach him. If I'm in the minor league side and, I text Sandy, for example, like, hey man, I'm here. He's like, why aren't you down here with us? Or, he said that the other day when I was with my son. He's like, why aren't you here? Like, are you coming down? Are you going to be with us? And then, like, they really encourage and support their coaching staff, and with zero egos. And it's just an unbelievable thing to see. And I think it just leads to a lot of productivity. I think the players see that, and the players feel like, hey, these guys are taking care of me all the time. And they really have my best interest. because they're willing to give up their own thoughts to really put a trust in somebody else to handle me. And so that led to these other guys trusting me. And then our other catching coaches, we have all of our catching coaches kind of come through on the big league side. And they've all come down and said the same thing. Like, that was the greatest experience, no egos. Like, I learned a ton. They really included me and allowed me to jump in, get my feet wet, and work with these guys. And I just think that just means a lot to everybody.
Oh, absolutely. And it's very rare, especially the ego piece, because even at the younger levels, I mean, it's all these kids just, it just doesn't seem like the game seems like it's further and further away from being about the player a lot of times. It's just so much involved in the travel ball scene and things like that just make it seem like these players don't have the ownership of the game themselves. They feel like they're just marching in line with this whole deal. But
have you ever been in a situation before where you have like an instigator? You have one guy, a group of people, and it's one guy that's an instigator, and he'll say something, and then he kind of like backs himself out of the conversation, and then the other guys are just talking or about it or whatever.
Yeah. That's
what takes place. Like, I've seen that so many times with our catching group where we're sitting on the bench together, and Albie, who's, I'm not gonna say he's a troublemaker, he's awesome, but like, Albie will say something about like, oh, well, I don't think you can get that, or how would you get that? Like, I don't even think that's possible, or whatever. When he knows there is, and then he kind of like backs himself out of the conversation, and all of a sudden, Bo and Hedgie and those guys, they just start talking, start trying to figure it out, and then Albie will kind of like give me this look up like this, like, just see, like, you created that, you created the collaboration just from and backing yourself out of the conversation, but like getting these guys to like talk about it and figure it out themselves rather than having him tell them. It goes back to what we talked about before, like self-discovery and stuff. And the conversations were just cool. Like, I wish I had a camera and just kind of videotape everything.
Hell yeah. Dude, that's
it's really cool to kind of see.
That's like real coaching too, right? And I think that's where we're like, we always think that you're coaching at somebody and just telling them what to do. And the reality is like getting them to think is just so massive. But dude, this has been an awesome deep dive in here. Our last segment, if you've watched before, we call Baseball Bites, presented by Black Bear Diner. I need you to tell me your favorite place to eat along your baseball journey. Could be anywhere on the road. Could be something at home, maybe a local spot, in Stockton or something that you love.
Baseball journey, favorite bites. There's a really cool place here in Stockton we love to go to. I got our Lake Elsinore team when I was with the Padres. We ended up having it catered into the Stockton ports. But John's Deli in Stockton is phenomenal. It's a true Italian deli with like real Italian food and stuff, and it's really, really good really, really good food. So
love that. Love a good sandwich too. It's such a baseball meal too, between doubleheader, smash a good sandwich.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's the best. Well, thanks, dude. I appreciate you coming on. Been a long time coming. Glad we finally got you on here, and hopefully we'll do it again. We can keep on diving into some of these nerdy catching details.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Anytime, man. That was great. Love it. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Best of luck this year.
All right, buddy. All right. Thanks. See you.
If you enjoyed that, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll have a new episode for you every single Tuesday here on our YouTube channel and wherever you listen to podcasts.